Hi, this is Jane, and I'm lucky enough today to be sitting down with Tony Steffen, the formulator of Q96 Empower Plus. We're going to talk to him today a little bit about his story. So Tony, tell me a little bit about your background and what you were doing before Q96.
You know, it's a funny question because what I was doing doesn't even relate in any way, shape, or form to what's occurred here. I guess that's the miracle of the whole thing. I was a property manager, a power engineer, and I looked after large-scale properties in Alberta. But what took me to where we are today was the fact that my wife had been diagnosed with bipolar affective disorder 1 with rapid cycling. That's one of the most significant disorders that you can have in mood disorders, and it was very, very destructive, and she struggled. And there were many, many times that I would have to leave off with my work as a property manager to come home and try and settle things down, because she really, really struggled. She did the best that she could. And eventually it got to the point that I gave up my career and we moved to a small southern Alberta town. It's a place that she was born, and I was hoping that it would actually put her back into a position where she could do somewhat better, because it affected me night and day. This wasn't the wonderful lady that I married that became so ill, and it was such a tragedy to watch as she struggled on a day-to-day basis. And sadly enough, when I was working in the U.S., she ended up taking her life. I mean, it was just like somebody dropped a nuclear bomb right in our living room. All of a sudden, all of your dreams are gone. They're just shattered. You have all these hopes, and your aspirations that 20 years from now we're going to be here and we're going to do this. And all of a sudden it was like somebody took the chalkboard eraser and wiped out our plan for living, our plan for life. Well, I had to do something, because my son Joseph at that time was 15 years old and absolutely violent. Same disorder like his mom. He would rage. He was explosive. My daughter, Autumn, married, living 6 hours north of us, and their marriage was starting to come unglued. And so I've got all these terrible things that I'm dealing with, and I'm feeling so helpless and hopeless, and there isn't an answer out there. And it didn't matter what we threw at it, it wouldn't get better. It didn't matter if there was counselors involved or medications involved, and my daughter was heavily medicated. My son was on 900 milligrams of lithium or carbolith, and he was just a lost soul. And so, realizing that I couldn't find an answer there, having worked with numbers of psychiatrists and medical practitioners, I set out on this journey, and I started to pray, and I started to fast, and I started to search, and I started to ask everybody, do you know anything about bipolar? Well, yeah, I know. My Aunt Sally had bipolar disorder, and how's she doing? Is she doing better? No, she passed away. She was in the institution, and her liver went out because of the medications that she was on. And all I heard was sadness. I couldn't find anybody that had real success where they had become normalized, that they were back, self-actualized. They were the person that they were meant to be. And it was just a dark, hopeless stretch in my life. And as I prayed and prayed and prayed and sought and asked and looked under every rock that I could, metaphorically speaking, looking for an answer, there had to be an answer somewhere. It was interesting because people started to come into my life that had little pieces of the puzzle. And it was amazing because it started to assemble. I remember walking down the hall talking to a fellow that later on got involved with me in this, and asking him, did he know anything about these issues? And him telling me that he had spent 20 years formulating feed for livestock. And I wondered where he was kind of going with it. And he said, I looked after hundreds of thousands of animals, and I used to see in the hog pens that these animals would have a disorder sometimes called ear and tail biting syndrome. And he said, these animals become aggressive and hyper irritable. And when he's telling me that, I'm thinking of my son, because that's what we're experiencing. Everybody's afraid of him. He's telling us that at nighttime he's going to burn the house down with us in it, and terrifying threats like this because of the disorder that he was struggling with. And he's telling me about how these animals become extremely irritable and they rage and they have explosive behavior. And he said, but you know, we learned very, very quickly in the agricultural literature, the scientific literature, that you could nutrate away the disorder. Like nutrate, like nutrition. And when he told me that, I understood what an epiphany was, because I had one. I absolutely felt that light, that burden lifted, and knowing that I'd found the answer. Right there and then, I absolutely knew we'd arrived. We're here. On January 17th of 1996, almost 2 years since my wife had suicided, I moved forward and started loading nutrients into my son. And it was an interesting experience because my wife and I had had quite a discussion over her refilling the prescription for lithium. She calls it a fight. I call it a family discussion. And I lost. And so when she came into the house with the bottle, this one here, she gave it to me and she said, you go ahead and you make the decision. I'll support you in it. So I took that bottle and I walked upstairs. We're living in an old 2-story house, and I went into our bedroom and I opened that medicine chest and I put that on that second shelf. And you know the amazing thing? I never ever had to take it down. I never ever had to use this again. Because within 30 days, this boy no longer exhibited any symptoms whatsoever of bipolar disorder. It was gone. I remember sitting on the couch with him about 6 weeks into this, with him taking these nutrients and him saying to me, Dad, where was I? What happened to me? What happened to me? Why was I so angry? Why was I so violent? And I said, Joe, it doesn't matter. That's another day. It wasn't you. It was the disorder. And so, you know, that's a memorial to me. It's a gift because I got my son back. And that was the most important thing in my life. It was an answer to prayer because there wasn't anything that we could do to correct it. And that answer came. And I've never looked back, and neither has he.
So once you knew your family was well, you then took a huge step to try to bring this to other people as well. I guess, what was the catalyst that brought that about, and how did you go about doing that?
Actually, it was a wonderful thing because we knew people that had children that suffered with ADHD, hyperactivity disorder. So I thought, you know, if this can't just work for the Stefan family, because my daughter Autumn got better subsequent to that, and Joseph was very, very well. And so I went out in the community and I started giving the nutrients away. And they saw the same thing. There was a lady down the street who hadn't come out of her house, other than to go to the doctors, for probably 10 years. She lived in her bedroom. The only reason that she would rise was to eat or to go to the restroom. Suffering with severe schizophrenia. She got better. Well, very quickly into this, after I saw so many people in that little town that we were living in southern Alberta, when I saw them get well, I realized that we needed to have some validation behind this. So I started working with universities, like the University of Calgary, the University of Lethbridge. And the University of Calgary started to do some research on it. And they ended up with a publication in the Journal of Clinical Psychiatry. The Journal of Clinical Psychiatry is the largest psychiatric journal in the world. It's mainstream. And all of a sudden we've got this publication there. And Harvard, Dr. Charles Popper picked up on it. And he himself had a publication there with 22 patients. 19 out of 22 patients with bipolar disorder got better. That's what the publication showed. It was so vindicating when the research studies were published, and we began to grow. We formed a company to support people that were struggling with mood disorders, and we set up a support system for them, and all of a sudden, we're getting major resistance from traditional medicine, from the regulator. And we ended up going through a period of time where we really had to battle hard in order to hold this together, because there were some forces in place that wanted this thing to go away. And I'm not here talking about a conspiracy. I'm just telling you that when you make a paradigm shift, there's always a natural resistance. There always ever will be in anything. And that's what we were experiencing. And so we struggled. We had to forge a way into the Canadian healthcare system. Eventually, we ended up having to go through court on it. We were successful in the court case. We were very, very blessed that the justice system saw through what was happening and awarded us a major victory, in the sense that they placed upon our shoulders an edict that we couldn't quit, that we had to serve the people that were coming to us, that we had a moral obligation besides a legal obligation to continue. And we did. Today we now sit with 20 medical journal publishings on things like ADHD, autism, obsessive compulsive disorder, bipolar affective disorder, depression. And we've seen tens and tens and tens of thousands of people who have normalized, who have their life back. And that's what this is all about. It's about restoration. It's about hope and healing and health. In our database, we've put over 80,000 people through this protocol and been extremely successful in helping those people. I think one of the most rewarding things that I've seen is how families have come back together that were separated because of mood disorders. People are back into their relationships, back into their educational pursuits, back into their careers. And it's been such a wonderful blessing. And now that blessing rests with Q Sciences.
So what brought you to Q Sciences, and this product obviously means a lot to you and your family. What made you trust this company to bring forth your product?
That's such a powerful question, because it's interesting, through the 17 years of history that we've been through, we've been approached by so many companies that wanted to either secure it or buy it out or have us license a certain thing to. I never felt good about that. They didn't have the right vision. And the vision was all about helping people, not about the money. I realized that in this life we have to make funding, or we're not going to exist. But all of the companies that had come to us had a totally different vision than what we had. And that vision is about hope and healing. And when I was first approached by Q Sciences, I thought, here we go again. Here we go again, another one. And I didn't really have an interest. But, the more that I talked, and it's not that I was convinced, the more that I visited with them, I had a major discussion with Darren, and I just felt it in my heart. I felt a major relief, like, hey, this feels like I've come home, because his vision was identical to my vision and to what we've always held all along. When I visited with Mark Wilson, the same thing. Had the same feeling. You've arrived. You're here. And that's why I'm doing this. It was never, ever our desire to set up a large marketing firm and to do this. But I also understood that we would never, ever fulfill the mission of getting this out to all people everywhere globally without having Q Sciences. I would be dead and in a box for 20 years before it would ever happen. And now that vision is starting to be realized in a huge way. And I see now that this is part of the design. It absolutely is. I believe that we were led to do it in this way. And we're prepared to put all that we have into this, because this is incredible what's happening. There are so many people that are healing now. The accelerated rate at which people can come in contact with this wonderful, wonderful natural formula that always was here, that always was given to the earth in that sense, that's just come together. And that's what it's about. So that's why I'm with Q96. Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Tony, for sharing your story. I mean, it's amazing, really inspiring to all of us, and we're all really, really grateful for the work that you've done.
Well, thank you. It's wonderful to be with you today. Thank you.